Hello and welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. Today, our topic is shadow figures, which I should say here at the beginning has nothing to do with actual ghosts, fallen angels, demonic presence, or entrapped souls. We've heard from a few people in relation to this topic who were like, I see shadow figures all the time in my basement. That is not what we're talking about here. In the Course, shadow figures are defined as images we carry of people in our past, people from our past, who didn't give us the love that we wanted. And so what we do with these images of people from our past is we project them onto the people in our present, and we act out our vengeance on them and try to take from them the love that we didn't get before. In other words, we're doing this dance of continually dragging the past into the present, which doesn't bring change, only grief. And the Course wants to help us recognize this pattern and break it in some pretty specific ways that we're going to talk about today. Shadow figures is a very unknown teaching in the Course, despite the fact that it's been there since the original publication here at the Circle. We've tried to highlight the concept more by talking about it more and by also making shadow figures its own section. In the Complete and Annotated Edition of the Course, you'll find shadow figures in chapter 17, section 3, but you'll also find the idea sprinkled around in a few other places. There are only 9 references to shadow figures in the Course, but it's still a truly powerful teaching that gets us out of the cycle of endlessly grieving what we didn't receive as a child or in our past relationships, and actually creating a different future for ourselves where we are identifying more with who God wants us to be than the person we once were. So, Robert, very, very important topic. So I hope I've done justice to the definition of shadow figures. Let's talk about how shadow figures work. What is the process that we can glean from the Course about shadow figures and how it works?
Okay, so this is just going to expand on the definition you've already given, which I thought was great. So briefly, you carry dark images of past people, mainly parents, but also others, toward whom you have grievances. And in your eyes, they didn't give you the love that you wanted and instead attacked you. So what you do then is you only notice people in the present who somehow or other remind you of your shadow figures. When you see them, it's to them that you relate, you become attracted to them, and they're the ones you fall in love with. You then project the relevant shadow figure or figures from the past onto those present people so that on an emotional level, you relate to them as if they were the shadow figure. Okay. And now with high hopes, you attempt to reenact the past with them and change it so that this time the shadow figures give you the love you wanted back then. But then, of course, what happens is the reality of the current person enters in. The fantasy you've been projecting onto them of you're the shadow figure, but you're going to do it better, fades, and all your hopes in that relationship fade with it.
So is this the Course's view of unholy romantic attraction, right? Like, aren't we attracted to people for better reasons than they remind us of those in our past who didn't give us the love that we wanted?
Yeah, I mean, it sure seems like we're attracted to people because they're smart and physically attractive and, et cetera, all these things we're looking for. But I think what the Course is saying is we are compelled by deeply unconscious forces. And that compulsion inside of us at a level below what we're aware of basically is saying you have to reenact that past so you can turn the tables and get from them what you didn't get from them. And so I think what's going on is that unconscious compulsion is guiding our attraction way more than we could ever realize.
Right. That's so interesting that we pick our partners not only to compensate for the love that we feel like we didn't get in the past, but also to punish those who didn't give us the love that we felt we deserved from the past. And so all of that's going on in the soup of our subconscious. And because it's subconscious, so much of this is subconscious, it's hard to recognize when we're doing it. And so for anyone who is thinking, I'm not sure if this applies to me, what are some ways in which we can identify whether shadow figures are active for us?
Yeah, well, we had a questionnaire in the workshop, and I'll just mention a few of the items that were on the questionnaire. The negative similarities between partners you have chosen is astonishing. Seems like you keep choosing basically the same person with slightly different hair color. Your partner, especially in his or her negative traits, reminds you of one or both of your parents. A big one, I think, is there's a lack of congruence between current people or partners or conversations and your reactions, which means that you might have a big reaction to a conversation or situation that's really quite minor. Your reaction doesn't fit what's going on in front of you.
Some of these I feel like we might want to draw out a little more because every single one of these factors in this questionnaire we could do an hour on. But that one you've just described, I think, is a biggie for people. So if, for example, you find that you are overreacting a lot to the people in your life, and you're hearing their feedback, like, who are you talking to?
That's
And
another one on the questionnaire.
why are you blowing this so far out of proportion? It could be because you're not actually seeing the person in front of you. You're seeing that shadow figure of a previous relationship projected onto them.
Exactly. Exactly. And like you were just saying, we do sometimes say or hear, like, who are you talking to? This is not me. This is not this situation. And yet the other person feels emotionally, their emotions overwhelm them. And it's as if emotionally they're in another situation with a different person.
And I want to park on here for just a second and give an example, because if abandonment is such an issue for us, and so if you feel that you've been abandoned by one of your parents or a previous partner, but particularly your parents, because this is very like old wound stuff, then you're going to be hypersensitive to a partner who you perceive as possibly being abandoning, even if that's not at all their intention. And one way that this shows up is if you text them, for example, and you want to hear from them immediately, but you don't hear from them for a couple hours, your response is anger, but from their end, they don't know where you're coming from. It's not that big of a deal to them, and maybe they had a legitimate excuse for not writing you. But it's that trigger of abandonment that causes you to overreact, and then you're not seeing the person in front of you. You're seeing like your parent, and the
Right.
so that's an
Yeah.
example.
That's an example. And I think what we're going to want to say is, but what about the times when I had that reaction and I was onto something that they were in denial of? Okay, fine. But what about the times that weren't that? What about the
Right.
times that you were seeing something that really wasn't there? Could it be you were seeing ghosts?
Right. Right. And for the 3% of the time that maybe they were just being rude, there's still like the 97% where you were triggered and didn't realize
Right.
it.
Yeah. Right. Right. So other signs that this is active, you want to prove to people in your past that they were wrong about you, that you deserved more, even if they will never see that proof, either because they're not on this earth or for some other reason you're not in contact with them. Another one was you believe or believed that your new relationship will show them. The whole show them thing is a huge sign of shadow figures being present here.
Weren't there more? There were 10.
There were more, yeah. I just thought we shouldn't go through all of them.
You didn't read the first one, did you? About always picking partners that are doomed to fail?
Yeah, you choose partners that in hindsight were just bound to not work out.
That's a biggie for a lot of people. I think
It is a biggie.
We either mostly subconsciously choose partners and then somehow we know it's not going to work and then it doesn't work. And then we say, well, nothing ever changes. And we don't realize that it's our own patterns at play.
Yeah. And we don't realize it because consciously we are probably not living in the past all that much, but emotionally we are. So we don't know what's actually is driving us kind of from the back seat, so to speak, or from the trunk.
Right. So the course calls this behavior insane. And in the workshop, participants had an issue with that language, but the course uses it for a specific reason. So let's talk about that. This is insane. Why is this behavior insane? And then we'll get into the problems they have with it.
Yeah, well, just before talking about the course's perspective, it really struck me. I had found a relationship expert named Harville Hendricks, who's now very elderly, but was very popular in his day, talking about a very similar version of this concept. I had found a spiritual teaching called The Pathwork, also channeled, talking about a very similar version of the concept. I found someone online talking about it. And in none of these places did they say, this is insane. You know, there's a tendency to want to make something sound like, yes, it's understandable. It makes a certain amount of sense. Don't beat yourself up for it. And the course just goes somewhere else. It says, you're crazy. You have, it's clearly obvious. You must recognize you have withdrawn into madness. And the reason is kind of obvious because, well, let me just read a quote from one of the main sections. And I just want to insert quickly that even though there are only 9 direct references to the term, there are 5 sections that really feature the concept and also feature the term. So it's a bigger teaching than we might think. Okay, so this is from chapter 13 in the text, section 5. It says, it is through these strange and shadowy figures that the insane relate to their insane world, for they see only those who remind them of these images, and it is to them that they relate. Thus, and here's the key part, thus do they communicate with those who are not there. And it is they, those who are not there, who answer. And no one hears their answer, save him who called upon them, and he alone believes they answered him. So if you read that carefully, you see what he's saying is you are talking to people who aren't there, and you're hearing them talk back to you. And even witnesses who are standing there next to you, they don't hear the people from the past talking to you. You're the only one who hears them. You alone believe they talked to you. And so what he says is you are living in your own private world that no one else sees or witnesses. And the idea of living in your own private world that does not mesh with the world around you, that's insanity.
Yeah. And when you wrote about shadow figures, there's an article in the library on the Circle site where you say that for a long time, you were thinking that when the course describes insanity in relation to shadow figures, it was just like some metaphysical thing, like anyone who comes here is insane. But then it started to dawn on you how literally he means this. Mm-hmm. Because when we are talking to people in our head that aren't there, when we are seeing our shadow figures in front of our spouse, for example, when we're having conversations with dead relatives in our mind and projecting our pain and vengeance onto the person who's in front of us, that is all insane behavior because we are literally talking to people who aren't there. And that is, as you're saying, the definition of insanity. So I said in the workshop, just because we're not kind of like walking down the street muttering to ourselves, it doesn't mean that there isn't something similar to that going on in our own minds that is causing us to be literally insane.
Right. Yeah. And what, just to kind of go into more detail about the contrast, I used to think, well, okay, so we've had a break with transcendent reality. We are not aware of it. It's not within our view. We're not in accord with it. And that's how we're insane. He doesn't mean, surely, when the Course calls us insane, he doesn't mean we've had a break with this world reality. Like we're all pretty, adjusted and in touch and all that. We're sane on this level. And what he's saying is, no, you have had a break with the quote unquote reality right in front of you because you're talking to the people who are in front of you, but in your mind, you're talking to someone else. And when they respond to you, you're hearing someone else. And that is normal insanity. And that explains a huge amount of all of our relationship problems and communication breakdowns.
Yeah, this explains so much of our communication breakdowns. And really, we should be clear here that there's degrees, right? Like when you talk to your spouse, you're probably not you're literally seeing your father right behind them talking to you. But at the same time, when you are triggered by the same issues, like from your shadow figures in your current relationship, we were saying the other day in the workshop that what the shadow figure caricature is saying to you, because I imagine there's some people who are like, well, what is the shadow figure talking to me? And what is he saying? It's saying some form of, I don't love you. It's some form of rejection.
Right.
And so, regardless of the words that are coming out of the mouth of the person in front of you, you're hearing the person from your past say some form of, I don't love you and I'm rejecting you.
Right. You're not worthy. You're a failure. I'm in the process of abandoning you. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And what I think is evidence is we all, I'm sure, have had relationships where you've been trying to get a certain thing across to somebody, or let's say they've been trying to get something across to you for years and years, and they just can't get it across to you, is because that hearing of your shadow figures is just that stubborn.
Mm-hmm. Right, because we're treating the person in front of us as if they're the ones who are literally saying, I don't love you, and I'm rejecting you, and I'm abandoning you. Even if the words that are coming out of their mouths is the complete opposite. Like if they're saying, I love you, but you're hearing, I don't love you, and I'm gonna leave in any minute, you're really insane.
Right.
And
Right.
so the issue that participants had in the workshop around the word insane was that it just seemed too strong. And someone even said, well, can't we just use the word disconnected instead? But the Course wants to use strong language because it's only by identifying with that strong language, like it's only by saying, oh, I really am insane, that you're going to have the motivation to say, and I don't want to be insane anymore. So I'm going to give this up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important. We're used to all kinds of psychological language, making it all seem really normal and really natural. And there's even a whole, which I won't go into now, there's a whole section in the CE where Jesus criticizes the psychologist, a kind of psychological approach that regards the combination of sex, which is supposed to be about love, and aggression, regards that as natural and it's understandable. And he's basically saying, no, you've got to question those things in yourself and in your patients. And that's what he's doing with this language here. He wants us to see that this is insane so we can be kind of shaken out of it and think, yeah, I should question that. Yeah, I want to get out of that.
I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I should say again, this is the same thing the course is asking us to do with the ego. We, just as we want to say, well, insane's a really strong word, so let me just use disconnected because it feels better. We do that with the ego. We say, well, the ego can't really be that bad because the world's a dangerous place, and I kind of need the thing here to help me navigate this danger.
Right.
And the course wants us
And
to
my ego's just afraid.
yeah, ego's just afraid, and it's hurt. And so if I just let
Right.
it in and let it sit at the table with me, then all will be well. And the course is asking us to reject the ego at all turns. It uses language like murderous, etc. And that's a classic course teaching, right? Like you it uses this language. It wants us to actively be vigilant to reject the things that cause us harm.
Yeah.
And so that's the idea with insanity and also the idea with the ego. Now, getting back to shadow figures, the course says that we bring our shadow figures from the past into the present, and we use that to justify attacking in the present. So we carry the story of our past victimization into the present, and then we use that to justify our attack. So let's go into that idea a little.
Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, it's right there on the page. For instance, here's a quote about that. They, the shadow figures, represent the evil that you think was done to you in the past. Then he says, you bring them with you only that you may return evil for evil, hoping that their witness will enable you to think guiltily of another and not harm yourself. In other words, hoping that the shadow figures being there will allow you to think unkindly and behave unkindly and feel innocent in the process. Now, what I find so interesting about that is once you catch on to that, and I think a lot of people have caught on to that, you realize it's happening everywhere. All you have to do is claim a certain victim status, right? And you get a certain carte blanche to behave in some pretty callous and thoughtless and unkind ways. And you get a pass on that, at least in your eyes, and maybe in the eyes of others, because of your backstory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a huge phenomenon in human life. And I think it's very popular these days where we're all becoming aware that there is a massive amount of victimization in our world and in our families and in our childhoods. And now we realize if we can just carry that sort of sign that says, I have been victimized, here's my backstory, we get a lot of license to
Mm-hmm.
do some pretty unkind things in the present. And what the course would add on to that is you don't really have a basis for doing that. You want to attack. And so in order to attack innocently, to attack without the byproduct of guilt, you think, you bring the shadow figures with you to allow all that to happen.
Yeah, and this is really tough teaching because we've been sharing this message for a while now, and oftentimes there will be someone who says, "You don't know about my past. You don't know the kind of abuse that I've suffered." And so it's really easy to say this message that you can rise above the traumas and the pain of your past, but it's really hard to put in practice. And one we'll talk about how to kind of break up those stories a bit more as we go through, but one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is children really are true victims in situations, even though the course does say that children have a certain amount of their own will to change um, how they view their circumstances. Children often, well, they don't have the power to change the actual circumstances sometimes.
Yeah,
But
in this world terms, I mean, the course would never acknowledge that someone's a true victim. But just according to appearances, those children just landed in a certain situation where they're sometimes horribly mistreated. We can't deny that.
But one thing that we do have control over is how much we allow the story to stay alive in our mind as adults.
Hmm.
And so when the Course says the past is over, it can touch me not, it means it. And so often what we're doing is we're so overly identified with that young traumatized self that we're trying to fix it, we're trying to fix our lives, but because of that over identification, we're just recreating the issues that cause us more pain. And that's
Yeah.
what's going on here with shadow figures.
Right.
We're by dragging the past into the present, we are, as you're saying, and as the Course says, attacking the person who's in front of us. And that's only going to hurt that relationship, break that relationship possibly, or at least make it miserable while we're in it. And then
Hmm.
all we're doing is recreating, we're creating more pain for ourselves. And then once again, wondering why nothing ever changes. And
Yeah.
so we have to kind of bring all of this to the light, call it insane, and that becomes the ground zero for change, real
Yeah.
change.
I mean, I think if you think of the classic scenario here of the extreme version of what happens with shadow figures, I think is where someone who was abused as a child or a very young person, they then grow up and become an abuser, which I think shocks the rest of us. And you think, how could they know what it's like? How could they do that to somebody else? Well, the shadow figure thing makes that not only understandable, but expected, because the idea is they carry with themselves the shadow figure, their image of their abuser. They project that onto someone in the present. And now their impulse is they want to turn the tables on their shadow figure, where before they were defeated, they want to win. They want to defeat the shadow figure. And so they then abuse this person in front of them, not particularly in touch with this person as their own living person, more in touch with the shadow figure they've projected onto them. And now they become an abuser where before they were the abused. How does that really solve anything? We all recognize that is not going to give them a happy life. We all recognize it's just going to create more misery.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where we say, how could they go on to abuse? They know what it's like to be abused. How could they do that? And it's because they know what it's like to be abused that they go on to do that. And
Right.
and that's part of what's going on here.
Yeah.
Um, it's, you know, this is a little bit of an aside, but if you are in a situation of extreme violence towards another person, there has to be something. There's so much violence in the world right now. There has to be something in you that's not seeing the person in front of you. It's not seeing the humanity of the person in front of you, because if you did, there's no way you could inflict so much pain on them. You
Yeah.
have to be dissociated from their humanity and seeing some other person.
Mm-hmm.
And so your vengeance on the person in front of you is coming from the vengeance you're trying to enact on the person from your past. It's a
Right.
sick cycle.
Right. Yeah.
So in thinking about why we recreate these sick cycles, there must be some kind of payoff in it for us. And so, in thinking about the payoff for our egos and keeping shadow figures in our mind, you've described this as vengeance theater, which is a great phrase. So, let's talk about what that is.
Yeah. Vengeance is really central. The word vengeance is central in the shadow figures discussions in the text. And the basic idea is that, okay, we think we lost the first time around. Okay. Those people in our eyes defeated us. Okay. And now we hope to reenact that. And this time we are going to defeat them and thereby extract from them what they did not give us, show them how wrong they were, and in essence, extract from them what they didn't give us. But we're not doing that with them, right? We're doing it symbolically. We hire an actor to play them, so to speak, right? And now this new person plays them, and we're kind of staging this play in which we reenact it and turn the tables, and basically we get our vengeance. We defeat them, show them how wrong they were, and extract from them what they didn't give before. That's vengeance, but it's a play. It's vengeance theater. We're symbolically acting it out, where it's only in our heads that we have gotten our vengeance from that person. So I think it makes sense to call it vengeance theater. And the other term there's no, corollary in the course for this, but I think it's been really helpful, at least in my mind, to get the whole concept. And that is a grudge match. Because in sports, there's this term grudge match. And the basic idea is you have some opponent, and essentially you've lost to this person or this team in the past, and you feel like it was an unfair loss. And so now you have a rematch. That's the grudge match. And now you're hoping to turn the tables, to emerge as the victor, so that you reverse what happened before and you get that sense of being the winner that you were unfairly deprived of in the past. And I like that term because it feels like our lives are kind of one big grudge match.
Yeah, and someone mentioned in the workshop that it kind of hit her that, oh, if I'm doing this with the people in my life, then surely they're doing it with me. And everyone's in this whole global theater, whole global
Right.
vengeance theater, whole global vengeance grudge match. And we don't know it. And so we wonder why the world never improves. We wonder why things don't really get better. And it's partly because the ego doesn't want to drag us out of the past. It likes to keep us there because that's where we stay in conflict. But it's also because we've got this vengeance theater and we've got these grudge matches going on all the time. I mean, we go through life, you like to say, with your dukes up. And that's true for so many of us.
Yeah.
We have our dukes up against life, and a big part of why has to do with these shadow figures.
Sure.
We're just
The
trying
course
to
says,
pull love out of people that we didn't get from those in our past.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're basically using everyone in the present to show them.
Mm-hmm.
But the weird thing is that we've put them onto the people in the present. So getting back at them means in some way getting vengeance on the people in the present because they're playing the past people.
I know. And I was kind of joking with you, like, at least if you're in a real grudge match, or at least if you're in a real play, presumably both people know what they're doing there. And so much of what happens with shadow figures is the person who we're putting the people from the past on doesn't know they're in the play. They don't know they're in the grudge match. And so it all comes as a big surprise. And they wonder why you're being such a jerk. And and so that's when the onus comes on us to own our side of the street, to own what it is that we're doing, and to call it out as insane, to call it out as egocentricity and not want to do it again. Now, this kind of brings up an important point, because we've spoken about childhood wounds here on the podcast, and the way in which the course recommends that we not spend too much time going back and looking at the past. There's a great line in the course that says, "Are you interested in healing your insanity or analyzing its past?" So how does this fit? Because with shadow figures, it seems like we are doing a lot of looking back. And we've previously said the course doesn't really recommend that. So let's discuss that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to talk in a little bit about the whole topic of forgiving the past. But as it turns out, the course is teaching on not going into a whole archaeological dig to find out, what's the explanation for my ego right now, is totally in keeping with the topic of shadow figures, because the big emphasis in the shadow figures discussions is not bringing them with you, leaving them there in the past and being fully in the present, not entering the present moment feeling like you're behind on the scoreboard.
Mhm.
And so it's a perfect match. Actually, there's no friction between the course's shadow figure teachings and its teaching to not do a big, go into what it calls the historical approach, where you look to the past to explain you.
Yeah, and this sort of ties into what you were saying earlier. So much of the current psychotherapeutic model is to analyze what happened to us in the past to explain why we are the way we are in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both have a healthy respect for that. I've gone through inner child work, for example, and found benefit from it. But at the same time, what we have seen as a result of that, and I think this is true, like not just you and I, like we've all seen examples of someone who has um, taken their past abuse and really used it to calcify an anger that they can't get rid of, and then they really do have their dukes up against
Mm-hmm.
everyone, and it becomes, they're in a battle against the world, right?
Right. So instead of doing the whole shadow figure dance unconsciously and maybe with a loud disguise, now they're doing it quite consciously without apology.
Right. The shadow figures teaching does feel like it's the vengeance is coming from a place of hurt.
Yeah, it started with us getting hurt, not getting the love we wanted.
Yeah, and so that does feel like anyone listening who's like, but wait a minute, you guys always say attack comes first, but now it kind of sounds like you're saying the hurt comes first. So what would you say to anyone who's listening who may be like, what are you all doing here?
Yeah. Well, I think one really useful thing is to read the section called The Essential Goal of Therapy in chapter 3 of the text. It's section 8, because this speaks to the whole issue about carrying stuff about your parents. It doesn't speak to shadow figures per se, but it does speak to the very root of the shadow figure phenomenon. And what it says, it's a hard teaching, but it's echoed and developed very openly and graphically later in the section called The Picture of Crucifixion in chapter 27. And the basic idea goes like this. It's also echoed other places too. The basic idea is we are invulnerable sons of God. That's our nature. Okay. So when someone mistreats us, meaning gives us messages that we're unworthy of love, okay, we don't have to take that in. Those messages don't have to hurt us because we can't be hurt and because we are worthy. But we choose to take them in on some level. We choose to take them in so that they do hurt us, because once hurt, we are then justified in punishing the other person. Um, and our hurt becomes the proof of just how guilty they are. Our hurt, even without any extra words or behaviors, it sends a message of blame all by itself. And, the course teaches that there's something very ancient in us that does want to punish, that does want to send the message of blame. That's at the heart of the ego. Okay. And so, yeah, I think as a small child, it's nearly impossible to not do the taking in, letting it hurt us, and so on. We haven't developed, I think, the strength of mind, the strength of will. I think that's not 100% true. There are children who can, but for most of us, we can't. And then we have a choice, however, when we grow up, do we want to keep carrying that sense of hurt, which really means, do we want to keep sending the message of blame? Or do we want to say, no, I'm going to identify with the invulnerable nature that God placed in me, and thereby accept that my parents didn't really hurt me, and thereby forgive them. So the Course doesn't really, even in this topic where it seems like we have an out for saying, yep, it all comes from I was hurt. Even here, it doesn't leave us with an out.
Yeah. And that's where forgiveness comes in. So let's talk about that. How do we apply forgiveness to this picture of shadow figures and childhood hurt?
Was a couple of ways. First of all, let's just, I think, acknowledge that forgiveness is key here. Unless you forgive the past, it will be alive for you and come into your present and invade your present. Like if we're going to leave it, like there's a great line in the Course that says, let the dead and gone be peacefully forgotten. And it's not talking about the people, but it's talking about what it calls in that place, the shadow voices, the shadow figures. To leave it all in the past, we've got to forgive it. And there's two things talked about specifically in regard to either shadow figures or parents. One is what we already said, to realize that who we really are is not an image that can be kicked around and hurt by parents and friends and teachers and so on. Who we really are is invulnerable. And if we can identify with that invulnerability, identify with the fact that we don't have an image in terms of our reality, we are not an image, then we can feel like, well, if I'm invulnerable, they didn't hurt me. And if they didn't hurt me, they're exonerated. They can be forgiven. Why hold a grudge against somebody who didn't really hurt you? So I know that's big, but that's one chunk of it. The main solution talked about in the section that we have now titled Shadow Figures is a really practical one. And that is to remember only the love they gave, and the love we returned, the love we shared. And yeah, okay. So in a lot of cases, that love is going to be like 5% of the situation or 10% of the situation. But from the Course's standpoint, that love, because the nature of reality is love, that love is the most real thing that occurred in the past. And being the most real thing, it's the thing worth remembering. We all decide that certain things are worth remembering and other things are not worth remembering. And what that section says is we selectively remember the hurt. We remember all the attacks because we want them here in the present to justify attacking, to give us that license to kill, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to instead let the Holy Spirit guide us to selectively remember only the love. And if we can tell ourselves philosophically that only the love is worth remembering because reality is love, that's a great way to let go and to forgive.
There's just so much there. We were talking in the workshop about when you're hurt and you have a conversation with a friend, for example, and you're telling the story about what happened to you to your friend, you tend to leave out the pieces where you were unloving and showcase the pieces where the other person was unloving. And then the story becomes all about the ways in which you've been hurt. And then the other person kind of like cocks their head and they listen and they feel sorry for you and blah, blah, blah.
Right. And they're on your side.
And they're on your side. And there's something in our mind that really does just, well, the ego obviously just clings to the negative, just absolutely clings to it, so that when we think back on relationships that have fractured or have even broken, we tend to only think of the ways in which we've been hurt. And so we said in the workshop, if you can recognize that when you're telling that story of how you've been hurt to your friend is an example of the ways in which the mind clings to the negative, then why can't we broaden that out and know that when we think of all the relationships in our lives, we have our part in displaying unloving behaviors, and they have their part in displaying loving behaviors, right? So if we can just remember the love as much as more rather than we remember the
Mm-hmm.
pain,
Mm-hmm.
then we will really do ourselves a favor. Because I'm gonna put you on the spot here, but what is the part in the course where it says all of your loving thoughts are saved for you and they'll be given back to you when you remember that that's the only thing that was real?
Well, I think you're combining a couple of places. One, the last part is from the psychotherapy supplement, where when the therapist and patient, even after they maybe have gone their separate ways because it wasn't working, the day they remember that only that was real in their relationship, it will be returned to them. It'll be saved until then, and then once they remember, it will be returned to them.
That's just such a beautiful idea.
It
And
is.
I think that for anyone listening who's thinking, well, really, like, someone has hurt me deeply, and my response is to only hold the loving thoughts and to recognize my true invulnerability as a son of God. That's it. Really? Like, you can't get me something more satisfying than that. When you really sit down and think about it, this is the most satisfying thing that could ever be, because this is the only thing that's real. When the Course says
Right.
nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, only the loving thoughts are real.
Yeah.
And so the idea that they're held for you in trust and given back to you when you realize that this is the only thing that's real, then, I mean,
It's a beautiful teaching. It's a beautiful,
yeah.
you know, you said a few times that you can make a one of those like photo or video montages of like the great moments in any situation, and in watching that you just think, oh, the love, the friendship, you know, that was so great. And there's something to that, like we could have our memory of our parents, even if they were not great parents, or of anybody in our lives, we can have our own montage of the really beautiful moments, and that can be our picture of the past.
I've actually forgotten about that, but yeah, I said that to you in some conversation because Apple will occasionally put up some like mystery montage on your phone
Right.
where they somehow know the people that are close to you and put the collage together with this sentimental music in the background.
Yeah.
And you can't, I mean, you well up when you see it. It's this amazing thing. And I was saying to you, what if Apple just did that with people that like exes? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know what? We really did have something, didn't we? And even if they're no longer in your life, then you realize what was true in the
Hmm.
relationship, and you
Yeah.
can kind of like release some of that pain as a result.
Yeah.
So speaking of, the Course says that shadow figures keep us in the past and they block us from joining with those in our present. And so as we're wrapping up here, I feel like we've talked about that idea all along.
Not
But
enough, I don't think.
let's say more about it.
Yeah, because this is huge. You know, with the shadow figure thing, we live in the past. And what that means is the person in the present who we selected, presumably, in our lives so that we can have some form of joining with, that person recedes because what's in our vision is the shadow figure we project on them. And then how do you join? How do you see someone when you're relating to somebody else in their stead? How do you join with someone when you're trying to join with a fantasy of the past, right? And so, what the Course says is that we have to come into the present, see our brother in the present for who they really are, and have what it calls holy encounters with that person. You can't have a holy encounter with some dark image of somebody from the past. You can only have a holy encounter with a real person in the present. And so, you know, the whole idea of coming into relationships so you can experience closeness and togetherness and joining is short circuited by shadow figures we have to move them aside so that we can fulfill that promise and actually be close with real people in the present.
It's a whole other course teaching on fantasy and dream roles, but those ideas are connected to shadow figures because part of what we're doing when we join with the person is joining with our fantasy of what we think they should be and what the course calls dream role that we've assigned to them to bring us our happiness. And so if we're connecting to fantasies and our roles that we've given them, irrespective of how they see themselves in the relationship, then we're not really joining with them at all, are we?
No, if we just join with this role we've put on them, and it's always, of course, the role to repeat the past and do it better, then they become like this cipher. They're not really there in our minds.
Yeah, it's a good question of how much are we really seeing each other, or how much are we seeing our own projections on the other person? So yeah. Okay. So we're getting to the top of the hour here. So just a couple final questions. One is at the end of the shadow figure section in the course, again, that's in the CE 17.3, chapter 17, section 3. There's a bit about how Jesus can help us in this shadow figures process. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, it really occupies the final paragraph of that section. And it's a beautiful concept. I'll just read the first line and kind of explain the concept. He says, "My holy brother, I would enter into all your relationships and step between you and your fantasies." And he's already talked about them as fantasies of vengeance, right? I'm going to, you know, put my shadow figure on this person in the present. And through getting the person in the present to do it all just right, I'm going to get vengeance on my shadow figure. And so the idea is he's saying, you have made this person into a fantasy. So let me first regard me as real, then let me step between you and your fantasy, and let me show you the reality of this other person, like with the fantasy image stripped away. And it really is a very practical thing. Like if you're in friction with somebody, if you can really imagine Jesus like stepping in between you and the stuff you've put on the other person, it does something. It short circuits what your ego's trying to do shadow figure wise.
And it's just one of those places where, as a course student, you realize how much help we have if we just ask. How many of us really think, well, Jesus is in the middle of my relationship with my partner, so I can just
during
trust.
This conflict.
I can lean on him in this conflict, and I can ask him to help me see clearly, because that's what Jesus did perfectly. He was able to look at another person and see the face of Christ and remember God. He was able to see people perfectly clearly as the Holy Spirit sees them. And so why wouldn't we lean on him if he's there to help us? And he's even saying in the course, I am here to help you.
Yeah. But it's a bit more than here to help. He's talking about, if you have someone who is wanting to do violence on someone else, what often happens? A third party steps into the middle. Okay, so that's what he's doing here. He's that third party stepping in between to short circuit the violence we want to do.
Isn't that help?
It is, but it's more specific than calling on his help. It's a very specific thing of somebody stepping in the middle.
As we close here, what's the big punchline? Like, what's the big takeaway for anyone who's made it this far and is thinking, okay, I get what shadow figures are. I don't want to do this in my life anymore. What do they do? Where do we go with this?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about that, both because of the workshop we just did. And, you and I have been kind of wrestling with how does this topic apply for us? It does absolutely apply for us. So what's the big picture? This is what it is for me. We've been living our lives basically in one big grudge match where we, in our eyes, were done wrong by in the past, but we're going to find some creepy way to repeat the past and change it so that we end up on top. We're ahead in the scoreboard and we'll have shown them. And what that means is, one, it means we're insane. We're talking to people, we're talking to ghosts in our private world, right? It means we're living in the past. It means our lives are subtly devoted to vengeance.
Mm.
So we need instead to forgive the people in the past, realize they couldn't really hurt us, remember only the love that was shared. We need to leave the past fully behind, to recognize the craziness of carrying a past that no longer exists around with us, to realize it's all forgiven and it's gone. And we need to see the people in front of us, to talk to them, to hear them and join with them. Because as the Course says, it's only in holy encounters that salvation can be found. So all in all, we need to stop living inside a gigantic grudge match and restart our lives in the present.
And build a better future from restarting in the present, because the life that we are being called to as sons of God is so much bigger than the life that we're leaving behind with that past.
Oh yeah.
So the life that we are being called to embrace is so much bigger than the one that we're letting go, and God is so much bigger than all the stories we tell ourselves about who did what to us and when and how we felt about it. And so the more we're clinging in our mind to those stories and grieving the past that we had and the love that we didn't get in that past, the less available we are to embrace that future that God is calling us to. And the world needs us to be miracle workers. It's just dire out there. And so we need to heal these wounds within ourselves so that we can go out and give the love that is needed to really turn things around on the planet today.
Yeah. And just one last little thing. I feel like we could have given this more emphasis. I saw this social scientist recently say human beings are all about connection. That is the driving force for every single person, connection. Well, shadow figures is the way we short circuit connection. We block connection. If we want connection, we've got to clear them out of the way.
Yeah. I think COVID is the way we've short circuited connection.
What?
Because
I feel like we just entered a different podcast.
Well, it's just I'm missing the connection that we all had pre-COVID. It's just so much is lost, has been lost.
Well, it's a good metaphor because we've been quarantined, not so much now, but we have been, and that's what shadow figures. What is the Course term private world but a form of quarantine?
You are so good. You
are bring it back there.
You are like politician-like in your ability to bring things back to the message at hand. I dig that about you, actually. All right, Robert. Well, thank you very much for another wonderful discussion. Thanks so much to everyone who is here joining us live. As a reminder, if you'd like to join Robert and I live for the recording of these podcasts, you are welcome to do so. There is no charge, and you can register for the link at circleofa.org/events. On behalf of all of us here at The Circle, we will see you next time. Bye for now.